Okay, I'm gonna re-explain or kind of dig a little bit deeper into one of the topics I mentioned in an earlier video. That I might replace that video with this video. I'll kind of different that as I go here. It's about the focusing on the trying to avoid the negative, bad, and ugly, right? And the whole hypothesis here, kind of thing is, um, rather than having a complex, um, I've done a lot of evaluations and things. What I found is in in let's go to let's go to the translation kind of perspective first, and then we'll do another video on the actual grids of how we do evaluating machine generated content. So I'll do the translation ones first. I'll do this one here. So the one here I want to talk about is how do translation companies, agencies, providers, whatever we want to call these institutions, how do they evaluate quality? Which is different than how low the computer geeks think about it. This is really important here. And now there's a bunch of there's a bunch of like ISO standards about this. Like at one of the ISO standards about actually this now. You got a couple of the ISO standards. I can't remember what they are. It's like the ISO 17,100, I think it is. And there's another one, 18,000 something something. I mean, I can't remember there are a few of these, right? And there was the whole post editing one too. That was a DIN number first, and went. I mean, all these numbers I haven't memorized them because I talk about it from time to time, but I try not to memorize all these numbers because I got other things to memorize, so I just go back and look them up. But there's the translation quality kind of general services one. Then there's one about post editing. There are a few of these different kind of certifications. But how are the translation companies actually doing this, right? I actually looked this up years and years ago. I looked this up in 2010. And I looked up all the main translation companies, all their websites. I actually did a word document this. I looked up all the websites, and I looked up how they were measuring quality compared to the one I was working on. I was working at perfecttranslations.com at the time. I knew how we were doing it. And I was looking at how they were doing it and who was doing what. And when I look up quality, it's just the word quality, how they were doing it. And, how do they talk about what they were doing? And it came down to is that there was a lot of talk about quality, but really not how they did it. We just do good quality. We do great quality. We do great quality. And actually, there were very few that actually said how they were doing it. And quality comes down to measurements. Do you have measurements to measure your quality, right? So, and people will talk about, well, we do spell checking. Well, how do you do the spell checking? I mean, do you do a spell checker? How do you log the things? How do you do it, right? How do you log the number of votes of mishits on the spell checking stuff? How do you log this? How do you do this? People say we spell check. Well, what do you do with the spell checking? How do you do it? All right, that's one example. There are some evaluation grids that are kind of really there that are really specific to this. One is the SEA J2450 that came out of the Society for Automotive Engineering, so J2450, which has a list of 8 categories, which are very specific, very, very specific. And they're great, but it takes a lot of time to do these things, right? To go through and actually take all the different the things that you've translated and actually go through and you apply these rules. And it has word omissions, it's got grammatical errors and stuff. So things I've talked in my previous videos, it actually covers a lot of those things, right? But it's kind of heavy to put this into place. And talk like General Motors did this, and they told us that they did in 1990, and they talked about doing this. And it's like a word of work. You got to do this. You got to really go in and actually do this thing. It costs time and costs money to actually do this evaluation criteria in 8 different categories, and log and look at every single thing, every sentence, right? That was done. I remember talking to Kurt Godden about this in 1999 and 2000 several times about this, how they were doing it. Then I was at translation.com and TransPerfect where I was selling medical devices with there was one of the business units that was a medical device translation unit, and I was selling their services. I can't remember what the family. It was an acquisition. I can't remember the name of the Mark is the name of the guy. I can't remember his last name. It's been so long, but he was kind of the specialist in medical device translation. There's back translations involved, right? So back translation, you actually got a process for actually doing this, logging how the errors are, because regulatory affairs and in back translation on medical devices kind of like it's critical stuff, right? So, so there's a very specific, actually, that there was a patent pending at the time. It might actually be patent approved now by the time now, of how they were doing this. They had a very specific procedure that they had kind of used, and it was really close to the J2450, if not actually using that again, right? Then there was a SOX, SOX, financial approach to doing financial translation, which was based on J2450, which was kind of an adapted version of it that TransPerfect was using to do that with back translation, right? For very specific part to, and very, you got to convince the actual customers to go into this, right, and do this, because it's kind of heavy. It's really hard. It's back translation, right? It's a lot of work. So people got to pay for this, right? So you got to make them pay for this to actually do it if it's critical stuff. So in those areas, there are evaluation criteria that exist, right? But then how is everybody else doing it, right? In general, people talk about having style guides. People talk about having a terminology list. And there were different approaches to kind of doing this. And I know that some of the things that we were doing that worked really well is to have style guides and to have you do a glossary kind of kit, and you do a glossary kit, you do a style guide per language pair, and then you do some samples across all the data off of the things you want to kind of use the terminology and the kind of data that you want to train on, you want to check on. You do some terminology lists that include some of that data, that content, and you want to do style guides that cover all the content, and you apply it, and you do sample translations of like 10, 15, 20 sentences stuff, and see if it applies and see what the customer says about it. Well, you know what? If they've approved the style guide and they approved the glossary on the language pair and they read through this and that, then the samples, you've actually got something in place that actually evaluates quality, right? Really easy to do. You got to convince them to pay for it. That's the thing. That's the hardest thing that most people struggle with, is actually getting the customer to pay for this. And I got customers to pay for it except for one time. And the one time I do remember, they didn't do it. I told them that if they did not follow doing the kit, this preparation kit, this kind of pilot for it, it was a beginner price, right? They didn't do it. Every single change that they wanted to be made, of the fixes, of the complaints, of the stuff, they would charge. And you know what? I charged 25% more at the end on top to make the modification, because I said these are in the style guide and the glossary that we've done, but you didn't want to do that, so you're going to pay. So actually, I paid 25% more of the project. They weren't happy, but I said, you know what? That's called quality. This is what quality is about. Want things, and we're going to actually have this. So this is the thing that you can do. You can put quality into. You can factor it into these style guides, into the glossaries, into the samples, approval process, and all that. This is not rocket science, okay? And so the whole goal here is to, how do you measure quality? Again, don't talk about quality. Stop talking about quality. How do you measure quality? Show us how to do it. Jerry Maguire, show me the money, right? Show me the quality. Show me the quality. I keep saying this, show me the quality. I keep showing how I do it. And I'm pretty clear about it. Just a lot of people talk about it. So it's really important to do it. And then people wonder, well, how I did things. I'll show it to them. They said, well, you can't do that. So I did it. And then they want to see it. And so I got some other things I've been available, and I actually do it in Word, and I do the tracking. And you figure all that. You figure out, you can just use you can backtrack it and figure all that, and you can reverse engineer it, and you can get it figured out too. I mean, I give statistics. No one has ever told me that my stuff is wrong. Not a single person. Because it was pretty easy to follow. Pretty easy to do. Just got to follow it, right? So this is what's important to do, is look at how translation companies are doing it. And this is where a lot of the machine translation, or computer generated translation, I'm going to say computer generation for voice and text, it's really not looking how, really not. I mean, there's lots of talk. I mean, I do see this. I've seen all the, all these machine translation conferences where they're saying they're doing stuff. I looked at the early versions when they said they were using bilingual people and stuff. They weren't bilingual translators. They're just people that spoke two languages that were part of the machine translation committee. That's not bilingual translators, okay? So you're not using people that are actually like the translation companies that go through a full translate approve process. So this whole kind of, well, we're doing this thing, like that. No, we're not doing human evaluation like how the translation companies do the evaluation, okay? You're not even getting close to it because you don't know how it works, and they aren't people that have actually done this before, right? So all these machine translation conferences, I kind of look at it and say, right, right, right. Well, you think you know what you're doing, but you're not doing it the way the translation companies are actually doing, because it's costly to do it. Because that's why the translation costs you. They charge you money to do this, right? So there's that whole thing that you got to look at how they're actually doing, how the translation companies are actually doing this, and how they're charging to do this, and that's the whole thing behind it. That's a really interesting part. And how do you do it for free? Well, nothing's for free, right? Free lunches are kind of hard to do. The so I still I'm very when I I'm very careful when I see when any computational linguistics thing said that they used human quality evaluation. I want to know the details about the human quality part of it. I want to know the details of who the people are. Because that's what the translation companies have to actually sell to their customers to prove. Well, that's where they get the trial quality standards to actually prove that they got native speakers that have not lived out of the country for more than 5 years, and they got it. That's because all these standards are in place to actually prove that, which none of these machine translation companies are doing to prove this. Right? They're just saying, "Oh, we had a committee, we had a workshop, we had this translation, all these, and we had these bilingual people. Bilingual, yeah, but like the bilingual secretary down the hall, which all translators say we never want to have a bilingual secretary doing translation for you, right? Because that's not a translator. This is a whole debate, and that's why the whole translation committee is very doesn't trust the computer generated translation machine translation community, because they know that these are people don't know how to do translation. Now, I'm not saying that they don't know how to do it. I'm just saying they're doing it a different way. And so I'm not saying that it's always good to follow the way that translation companies do it, but I'm saying the way translation companies are doing it is different. Now, what are the machine translation folks doing? At least in the statistical and neural communities, okay? Compared to what all the translation companies have been doing, right? Now, a lot of the machine translation companies have been doing, a lot. There's talk about. I'm not going to go into all the different metrics, okay? Because there's lots of them, but it all start with Bleu metrics, and then Meteor. I mean, those are kind of the earlier ones. There were other ones too. I mean, I made a whole list of all the different ones. There were other companies that did this, but and then they had the Bleu, and then they had different variants of colors with different names. All of these are kind of computational things, right? They're all computation. It's based on word distance type of stuff. How many changes were made? How many characters were changed and stuff? Which is not quite what the translation companies are doing, because translation companies are looking at what the meaning is, not what just what the statistical changes were, right? It's what the changes were made to actually have meaning and purpose. But, I mean, it's getting somewhere. The statistical approaches are trying to at least quantify stuff, because it's easier to automate this stuff, right? Automate this, and actually, the translation companies, you have to do it manually, right? But you can quantify it by automating some to a point. But there's a limit to that. And the whole thing but in the end, none of the translation companies are using Meteor or Bleu or whatever to actually do the evaluation of their actual translations. I mean, it doesn't make sense because it's all statistical, right? But they can use it as a kind of an input to kind of get an idea, but they're not going to be doing that from that. But they're not trying to also, the kinds of things that you're trying to translate, there is a difference between evaluating translated plus edited content versus evaluating computer generated translation plus post edited content. There's a slight difference. And I actually did a lot of subtitles too that were speech to text generated, and then I did the monolingual post editing on top of that. So that's kind of really close to the machine translation kind of one. fairly close, the kind of the principles, and you have minimum editing and all that. But see, these are really different, different approaches, and so it's really important to understand this and then go into having a different approach or have an approach that makes sense, that's not too complicated, but does take into care of these consideration of these things. And so I'm going to come to the next video here about some adapted ways that I've done this while working at machine translation companies, not using Bleu, right? So Meteor. I did things in a different way. Because I was trying to find the middle way of doing it that still reflected how you do it in a translation company, of how translation actually, assessed, and language and stuff. Because I've talked about the language assessment, language, teaching assessment procedures here. So I want to talk about how we've done it, and I've done it in kind of a couple different places, and that's kind of going in a direction where I would continue to do it, because I think that the statistical ones, they have value, but it's a different value, okay? And I'm going to say here that, and I said this in my LinkedIn posts in 2009, 2010, that for me, Bleu and Meteor and all these other ones, okay, are for me, they're what I call, it's kind of what I would do in a software testing environment when I'm doing some sanity check and sanity testing, maybe unit testing. I'm doing kind of the first pass at a software program check, and I want to get a thing. Can we even start to use this thing, right? That's what I would do. But I wouldn't use it for the high assessment of the final stuff of actually assessing the quality at the end. It's just, do we filter it out, and do we get it through the sanity checks? Then do we actually get it to where we're going to start using it? And then we have another way to approach this. But see, this is not how a lot of people are doing it. At least not I've seen people doing it. They're using the Bleu and the Meteor and all these other ones and the Rouge and whatever. I mean, they're using these as ways to assess the quality in the end, which is what I would not do, because it's not what people are doing, right? And that's how you assess things. But it's a good for sanity checks. And so that's why I compared this to these metrics are how they compared in the software world to software development testing teams. It's in that process of between the development and the testing teams, and you got different levels of testing. You got unit testing, you got integrated testing, or integration testing, suite testing, performance, and you can get into the whole thing of performance, scalability testing, all that. I mean, I know this because I've been done this too. But at what point do you take it, and then you want to be able to do, because you got to do all this kind of testing to actually see that you're actually seeing that the features I've gotten through. And at one point you take this to automated testing, and once you go to automated testing, it's even more, because you actually take that thing, you have to make, can you automate this thing? Can you automate this? Can you simulate to have the computer actually do what the human actually testing to do this, right? So this whole thing is, there's a lot in that, and I would just say that a lot of these metrics I've seen are more in the software test cycle thing rather than the end beta and customer validation testing at the very end, in which the customers actually do. It's called customer acceptance testing, right? I mean, when I've done telecom, we called it the customer acceptance, right? It's not the stuff we're doing in the test teams that are on test acceptance and stuff, and way up in the cycle, in the development cycle. That's way before you get delivery. It's customer acceptance you want to focus on, and you can have conditional and provisional and all this stuff, right? So it's not anything compared to that. And so that's why I'm really hesitant to use some of these metrics that we usually talk about, because it's not the way it's done in industry, okay? Neither in translation and nor in the other industries I've worked in, like mechanical engineering and telecom, right? Just not the way it's done. You do this at different levels, different types of tests. So I'm really careful on, again, to say that Meteor or Bleu or whatever, and there are other ones now, the whole word edit distance stuff, and it's a type of metric. It's a valuable thing to measure, but it has a value in a certain types of, in certain assessments at certain types and levels, right? So I would not use it for finding final stuff, but I'd use it to actually figure out how much this change are being made. And there's some tools that kind of do this, like the Corbett, the ProMT Corbett tool was really great for doing this kind of stuff, to doing kind of trilingual text stuff. It was really tri-text stuff. It was really great for this. They actually give a percentage, and you could do percentage based on the number of words and percentage based on the number of characters. So it was really cool. I've actually got the CD for it. Great stuff but only in text files. Be great if it could handle a lot of other file formats and stuff. But this is really great. ProMT, you guys get it. A really cool tool. Your Corbett tool is just super, for that. And they call it Corbett, but it's evaluation, right? So evaluation text. So that's really cool. So again, we're going to get into some other stuff, but I want to kind of keep us going along these lines of what kind of evaluation metrics you use and what I would do. And I'm getting us to the point where I'm beginning to reveal how I do it. Okay, so let's keep going and get to the next level here of the video series.